Welcome to the Buckeye Battle Cry Show, where I discuss college football games and topics. I am your host, Brandon Held. Today's topics, I'm going to discuss Week 14 highlights, Buckeyes versus the team up north, top 5 game review of last week, and predictions, my top 12 rankings and playoff teams, my version of the FPI, the Football Power Index, and a preview and prediction of the conference championship games. Week 14 highlights. Let me start with the game. Check out this graphic that I pulled off of Instagram. This shows how Ohio State has dominated the series against the team up north the last 25 years. This game put the Buckeyes on the right side of the graphic this year and hopefully will continue for several more years to come. I have to say there were a lot of fans wearing scarlet in the stadium. It was very impressive to see on TV. Buckeye fans travel better than anyone else in the country, in my opinion. And so this week, in honor of Urban Meyer, my favorite coach of all time, I will refer to them as the team up north today instead of my usual scum terminology that I use when talking about them. The hype leading up to this game was about how the team up north had won the last 4 games and the fact that them and their alumni actually believed they could win this game was amazing to me. The team up north fans, there's a lot of them that reached out to me and they talk smack saying how they would beat Ohio State. And it just shows me they just don't know football. It's just blind faith in your team. And, that's cool, I guess, but it's not realistic. I've had some of these fans reaching out to me, and this week I will be reaching out to remind those guys that I was right all season long and they were wrong. So let's see how many disappear into the shadows now that the team up north actually not only lost, got beat pretty handily at home by the Buckeyes. And I just want to say the Buckeyes could have easily won this game by 4 touchdowns. They were moving the ball at will, especially in the second half. And they took the foot off the gas and just ran the ball to run down the time. So let's just start with how the game started. The team up north gets the ball first. They receive the opening kickoff, and on their first possession, first play, they get a nice 35-yard run, first play of the game. And everyone is excited, thinking they'll be able to run the ball this game, and that'll give them a chance to beat Ohio State. And they go down the field and they get into field goal range. And of course, the defense stops them and holds them and forces them to kick a field goal. Then the Buckeyes come out for their first possession of the game, and the very first pass Sand tries to throw is a deep shot to Carnell Tate, which personally I absolutely love that they started the game that way. But to their credit, it was well defended, and the team up north knocked the ball out of Carnell's hands, and it was incomplete. And then the second play, Sand tries to throw a back shoulder to Jeremiah Smith, and the DB was playing underneath, and he picks it off. So it looked like a terrible start for Ohio State. And then, of course, the defense comes in, and they force them to kick another field goal, and it's 6-0 pretty quickly in the game. But then Ohio State starts playing for real like they normally play every week, and then they basically thoroughly dominated the rest of the game. So we all know the final score was 27-9, and it could have been much worse. And I gotta say, that is what I loved and why I miss Urban Meyer, because they went into the running game after it was 24-9 because he knew it was over. The defense at worst would give up another field goal, but the game was won. So they just ran the ball and genuinely did not call really any pass plays to push the ball down the field or even try to score again. Personally, I would have loved to see him stay aggressive and win this thing 41-9, which could have easily happened if he wanted to do that. Something Urban Meyer would have done if he was head coach. He would have not taken his foot off the gas, and he would have done his best to run up the score against a team up north. And Day just doesn't do that. And frankly, I don't like it. I would have dominated them as thoroughly as I could have. Some other things about this game that should be noted: the refs were pretty bad as usual. Both pass interferences called on Ohio State were absolutely not pass interference. And listening to Klatt during the game justify the refs calling these terrible calls, it's disgusting. And he sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about when he calls the game, and he justifies these bad calls. Also, the no calls you see on the team up north's offensive linemen who are holding Ohio State's D linemen, laughable. They are clearly holding, and it's not getting called. So consider this: the team up north had exactly 100 yards rushing. If the refs call holds, they don't even get to 100 yards. But the refs don't call any holds against Ohio State's D-line. Imagine that. All the players they put in the NFL, none of them ever get held. I know the team up north fans are going to argue like, oh, the refs made a bad call when Jeremiah Smith's touchdown, it should have been called back. Well, first of all, it's called a touchdown on the field. Second of all, I think you can argue whether or not Jeremiah Smith actually ever fully lost control of the ball, just because it looks a little bobbled versus losing control. Those are two totally different things. It was a touchdown on the field. The refs kept it as a touchdown in game. And had it gone the other way, it being the team up north who made that play, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. That was a legitimate touchdown. He caught the ball. He got in the end zone. It was a touchdown all day. And if the team up north would have had a similar play, them having the touchdown would not be a big deal to me because it was an earned touchdown. And I saw multiple times throughout this weekend, throughout college football, that the refs were just bad. And when a play was reviewed and it even looked like on camera that possibly the refs could have been wrong live, the refs still stuck with the play. So it just seems to be the norm that refs don't want to overturn calls that they made on the field unless it's just absolutely egregious. And this was another one of those situations. Anyway, Ohio State's defense held the team up north to 163 total yards of offense, which of course means they passed for 63 total yards. This is anemic no matter how you want to slice it. When your quarterback goes 8 of 18 for 63 yards and 0 touchdown passes, and they had 0 touchdowns rushing, you're not going to win any football games. So to put that in perspective, the team up north had a 36-yard run and a 22-yard run, which is almost half of their rushing totals in 2 runs. So the defense did a fantastic job once the game got going, and they adjusted accordingly. It seems like each week the defense starts off a little soft on coverage or not aggressive attacking the other team. And then after they get warmed up, the defense tends to dominate, but it just seems to take a little bit of time before the defense gets going each week. Now let's talk about the offense. Julian Saint had a nice game, not a great game, but a very nice game at 19 of 26 for 233 yards with 3 touchdown passes and the 1 aforementioned interception that I talked about. I think, unfortunately, he just won't have the numbers to win the Heisman Trophy because he just doesn't get the opportunity to go out there and throw the ball 40 to 45 times a game because Day doesn't give him that opportunity. Now, I know the Buckeyes are all about team and winning, and as a fan, I appreciate that the Buckeyes win. Also, as a fan, I want to see us win some individual awards. There's no doubt Jeremiah Smith is the best receiver in college football. No doubt. But the coverage he receives does not give him the numbers, and in my opinion, he will most likely not win the Biletnikoff Award for this reason. Just like I believe Sand is the best quarterback in college football, and I would love to see him win the Heisman and bring that baby back to Columbus, he just doesn't get the attempts to put up the numbers because Day shuts down the offense or lets the second team play when the Buckeyes have a big lead, which is pretty much every game. Okay, moving on. Bo Jackson had 22 rushes for 117 yards at 5.3 per carry, and he looked really good. And the offensive line looked very good this week, much improved from previous weeks. There were also times when Bo Jackson looked like he was going to be stuffed for no gain or possibly a loss of yardage, and he made a play, either to get positive yards or sometimes break off a bit of a longer run of 10 plus yards. And Bo Jackson is just a gamer. I think you could see that in spring ball when he was getting a chance to play in the spring game, and he just needed to get on the field, and he got on the field, and he is definitely rewarding the Buckeyes for getting him on the field, and now he's the starting running back. The Buckeyes look like the best team in America. They just do. Offensively and defensively, they're solid every week. Defensively, they're the best. Offensively, they're efficient and solid every single week. The defense is going to be tough to crack, and the offense consistent, like I said. So the Buckeyes finished the regular season 12-0, and they're on to face Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. And I'll discuss that a little bit later on in the show, of course. And as far as last week went, I, of course, picked Ohio State to win the game. So that makes me 1-0 in my picks so far for the week. Now let's discuss a couple of Friday games, and we'll start with Georgia and Georgia Tech. Georgia wins this ugly game 16-9. And that's not a mistake. That is the final score, 16-9. Just a massively unimpressive showing offensively by both teams. Georgia had 260 total yards, of which 200 was on the ground, and Georgia Tech had 250 total yards, which most of it came by passing. So neither team looked very good, and frankly, they both looked like mid-tier Big Ten teams, maybe the same level as Nebraska or Minnesota. Georgia's quarterback, Gunnar Stockton, was 11 of 21 for 70 yards and 1 touchdown and 1 interception, and this is supposed to be an elite SEC team against an ACC team. This is a team that someone is supposed to fear in the playoffs. That is against Georgia Tech. Their defense isn't half as good as Ohio State's or Indiana or Oregon. All of those defenses are better than Georgia Tech's defense. So why do I bring this up? Because no other fan base has talked more crap to me than Georgia fans. Georgia backdoors their way into the SEC championship against Alabama. And frankly, it honestly doesn't matter who wins the game, because Alabama's struggle to be a very bad Auburn team just shows how mediocre they are as well. I genuinely would and will take Oregon, Indiana, and of course Ohio State to beat any SEC team. More on that later as well. But I did pick Georgia to win this game, as unimpressive as it was and their performance was. And that made me 2-0 on last week's picks so far. Now, the Friday night game of Texas A&M at Texas was a bit of a surprise. Not that Texas was able to score and get 27 points, but Texas A&M couldn't score. And I felt like this game we saw was the first time this season that Texas was able to put together like a full game. This was the team we were expecting to get at the beginning of the season, just a day late and a dollar short. And both teams moved the ball well and did put up yards. The key difference in the game were the 2 turnovers by A&M, specifically their quarterback Reed, who threw 2 interceptions at very costly times. And those are frankly the difference in the game. You know how I feel about turnovers, what game wreckers turnovers are, and Texas wins it 27-17. Neither quarterback was particularly impressive. Arch Manning went 14 of 29, less than 50%, for 179 yards and a touchdown, but he did take care of the ball and he didn't throw any interceptions. Both teams were able to run the ball effectively. A&M for 180 yards, Texas for 179 yards. But again, the turnovers are killers, and Texas walks away as the winner of this game. Afterwards, Sarkisian makes a dramatic plea for Texas playoff lives. And I have to say, while I understand you are fighting on for your team, how does Texas not understand that even with the loss to Ohio State, it's not the loss to Ohio State that punishes them as a 3-loss team. It's not what stops them from getting into the playoffs, because they're trying to argue, why should we play a tough game like an opening game at Ohio State if you're going to punish us for 3 losses? Let's remove the Ohio State game from the equation. It's the 2 losses that absolutely kill you. I mean, Texas, you lost to a 4-8 Florida team, and then you turn around and then you lose by 25 points to Georgia. Those 2 losses alone are why you don't belong in the playoffs. Forget the loss to Ohio State at the beginning of the season. Even if Texas was 10-2, they don't belong in the playoffs. I did pick A&M to win that game because Texas had shown me nothing really prior to that to make me believe they had what it took to stop A&M's offense, and they did force a couple turnovers and they did win. That made me wrong on that pick, and that made me 2-1 so far for my picks of the week. On to Miami at Pitt. Can we just talk about how Miami thoroughly dominated this game? Passing, rushing, defensively, Miami held Pitt to 30 yards rushing. Notre Dame holding them to 70 was impressive, and Miami took it up another level, holding them to 30 yards. Also, Notre Dame beat Pitt by 22 points, and Miami won this game 38-7. For those of you not doing the math, that's a 31-point win. So I ask you, based off this common recent opponent and the fact that Miami did beat Notre Dame, which team belongs in the playoffs more? Miami should be ranked higher than Notre Dame, in my opinion. And you say, well, Notre Dame lost to Miami and A&M. But yeah, if you're going to use Miami as your argument for a quality loss, then Miami should be ranked higher than Notre Dame for that to be your argument. Miami does not have any bad losses. They lost by 3 points, an 8-4 Louisville team, and they lost by 6 points in overtime to an 8-4 SMU team. Those are not bad losses. They beat Notre Dame. They destroyed Florida, which many SEC teams like Georgia struggled to beat. So there is no solid reason that this 10-2 Miami team does not belong in the playoffs. None. That's my rant about the Miami or Notre Dame discussion that everyone talks about. But in my opinion, you don't have to pick Miami or Notre Dame, and I'll tell you why later in the show. So I did pick Miami to win this game. That made me 3-1 on my picks so far. Now, on to the Oregon and Washington game. Oregon wins this game 26-14. And while Washington is scrappy and very difficult to beat at home, with losses only to Ohio State and now Oregon at home this season, it's safe to say the talent on Oregon is just so much better than Washington, and the gap isn't going to get closer anytime soon. With Nike money supporting Oregon, their resources in this nil NFL, college football world are top tier. Oregon's recruiting is at the top of the country, and they currently have the most 5-star recruits coming into Eugene next season. This is a very good program on the rise in the Big Ten and national scene, should be put on notice. Oregon is coming, and they will be a national championship football team in the near future. It's just the reality of this situation. I know I sound like an Oregon fan right now, but trust me, I am not. I'm a concerned Ohio State Buckeye fan who can see what is happening, and it cannot be ignored. They are making a hard push for our top recruit, Chris Henry Jr. And if they get him to flip, then forget it. Oregon will be the best team in the country in the next coming year or two, and it won't even be close, really, honestly. And I know this segment is less about the Oregon-Washington game, but the game itself, you never really felt like Washington was a real threat to Oregon because the talent is just too much, and it's only going to get better for Oregon. So I am concerned about it, and if Oregon's not your favorite team, then you should be concerned about it too. All right, so Oregon wins, and I chose them, of course, and that made me 4-1 so far on this week's picks. And the final game that I picked last week was Vanderbilt at Tennessee. Now, Tennessee was favored by 3.5. Let me just get this over with. I did pick Tennessee early, and it looked like a good pick. Tennessee was up 21-14, and the defenses were not really doing much to stop the other offense from moving the ball. Vandy was moving the ball, but Pavia had made a couple bad throws early and had 2 picks in the game. And so at halftime, it kind of looked like this was going to be a track meet. The last team with the ball was going to win sort of game. But the second half was a completely different story. Vandy moved the ball at will. Pavia stopped turning the ball over. Tennessee could not do anything to stop them. And Pavia looked like he was the best player on the field. And he definitely, in my opinion, played himself into Heisman contention. And in a rivalry game against a top 25 team at the time, according to the committee, this is where I personally was surprised that Tennessee's inability to move the ball in the second half and Vanderbilt's defense really stepped up and shut Tennessee down. I did not expect that. I didn't think they could do it before the game. I didn't think they could do it after the first half of the game. But the second half, they just shut Tennessee's offense down. And Vanderbilt rushed for over 300 yards, and Pavia had 165 of those yards, which is unheard of as a quarterback. He still passed for 268 yards on 18 of 28. And he had a touchdown pass to go along with those 2 interceptions. Tennessee's quarterback Aguilar, he had a solid game at 29 of 44 for 299 yards, but he only had 1 touchdown. And the running game for Tennessee was just shut down. By the way, could you imagine Sands' numbers if he got to throw the ball 44 times a game? He would be a lock for the Heisman Trophy. I digress. So Vandy's defense showed up in the second half, and I lost this pick, and that did put me at 4-2 for the week. And later on, I'll go over my overall picks on the season as far as my record. But now I want to talk about other notable games. So let's just start with the fact that after Cupcake Week last week for the SEC, they had to play some out-of-conference games on Rivalry Week. And let's just see how that went. So we all know Georgia struggled to scrape by Georgia Tech with a 7-point win and scoring 16 points in a game where their quarterback was awful. And Florida apparently was the class of the SEC at 4-8 because they thoroughly whipped Florida State 40-21, the team that beat Alabama, as we all remember. Kentucky, who Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas all struggled to beat. Let me say that again. Kentucky, who Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas all struggled to beat. They barely beat Kentucky. Got absolutely destroyed by Louisville. 41-0. Let that sink in for a little bit. South Carolina, who is also 4-8, who Texas A&M, Missouri, and Alabama all struggled to beat, lost to a 7-5 Clemson team, 28-14 at home. Clemson did a better job against South Carolina than Alabama did. So the SEC went 2-2 for out of conference against mid-level or poor quality teams. So I ask you, where is the proof that the SEC is a great conference? Show me any stats anywhere that their out of conference performance is a resume of quality wins. The best wins I see for the SEC by far at this point are a 1-point win A&M had the second game of the season over a 2-loss Notre Dame team. And coming in second is Oklahoma's home game win against the team up north, the second game of the season by 11 at home. Outside of that, the losses are far, far more damaging to the reputation and quality of the SEC. So I would pretty much guarantee if the team up north played Oklahoma this past weekend in that weather that Ohio State had to play them in, Oklahoma loses that game. I just do not get the overrated hype of the SEC. I don't get it. I genuinely believe they are a mid-conference, and that will show in the playoffs. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Arizona beating Arizona State in a big rivalry game here locally where I live. That's a big win and a very good season for the 9-3 Wildcats, and congratulations to them. Now, unfortunately, their coach is a viable candidate for other schools, and it would be sad to see him go and get stolen, just like Washington did with Jedd Fisch. If you don't know, Jedd Fisch came to Arizona and they had a very good season like this year, and then boom, off Jedd Fisch jets to Washington. And Arizona goes out and they hire Brent Brennan, and he's doing the same thing for them, 9-3 year, and that might happen again if he gets hired by a bigger program who wants to spend more money. And to me, that would be a shame if that happens. But congratulations to Arizona, University of Arizona, on a great season. All right, let's move on to the final Big Ten standings of the season and see how the season finished out. I can say openly and honestly that I projected Penn State to play Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. I had no idea Indiana would be this good after last season. I didn't even know that they had gotten Mendoza from Cal in the transfer portal, and that's on me. So that's a lesson learned for me that I need to pay more attention to the transfer portal guys this next coming up off season. That's significant because I had Oregon undefeated, and it turns out their only loss ended up being to the undefeated Indiana team. I also had a 1-loss Penn State team losing to Ohio State, but still playing Oregon for the Big Ten championship. And we all know the story of Penn State's tragic fall off of a cliff this season to go from national champion title contender to a 6-6 football team, with James Franklin being fired. Now, preseason, I knew Ohio State had young, untested talent. I knew that, but I did not know how exactly that was going to play out on the field. I definitely expected some ups and downs that you typically get with young, untested players and teams, but they actually turned out to be the most consistent Ohio State team I have ever seen in my life. This is the best Ohio State defense I have ever seen. And if they don't go on to win the national championship with this defense, then something very drastic will have had to happen for them to lose. The bottom teams in the Big Ten are all pretty much as I projected them to be. The only teams that were better than I projected going into the season were Indiana, Iowa, and Ohio State. Indiana and Iowa, both for same reasons. They went out and got quarterbacks that I really wasn't familiar with or aware that they had gotten. And then Ohio State, I just explained. They were young. I didn't know how a young team was going to perform. Apparently, the coaching is on point. They've been focused every week, and they look amazing. I had Ohio State as a playoff team, but not as the undefeated best team in the country like they are. I also did think Illinois would be a playoff team. I had them as a 2-loss team at the end of the season with losses to Ohio State and maybe Indiana or Washington. But they lost those games. Well, they lost Ohio State. They lost to Washington. They did beat USC. They also lost to Indiana. And they lost another game. I can't remember, but they ended up being 8-4. And this season is not at all what I expected for Illinois. So yeah, I'm disappointed. They had 17 returning starters. This is, in my opinion, a disappointing season for Illinois at 8-4. So that's a wrap on the overall Big Ten season, and congratulations to Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon for making it into the playoffs. And so we'll see what happens in the playoffs with those 3 Big Ten teams, which I believe is the best conference in college football. And I know a lot of people are going to argue, oh, the SEC has a lot of teams with winning records, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. So does the Big Ten, but oh, by the way, they actually play tough games outside of in-conference games, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to get into that argument. Now let's move on to the SEC standings. Here you can see this is a tough graphic to fit on the screen and be readable, but this is what the SEC looks like. Overall, what are the surprises here from a fan's perspective? I would say based on preseason hype, Texas and Georgia were the favorites going into the season by the media overall. Ironically, Georgia needed Texas to win their last game against A&M to back their way into the conference championship game. Texas did them a favor, and with Alabama beating Auburn, barely, mind you, Alabama, who I did pick to win the SEC, will take on Georgia in the SEC championship game. Now, this will be interesting because if Alabama does win the SEC championship game as a 2-loss team, where will the committee rank them? If this were to happen, the committee would be completely justified in having Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, and Texas Tech, assuming Texas Tech beats BYU, as their top 4 teams. I don't think the committee has the balls to do that, but it would be most true and honest ranks if Bama were to win the SEC and give Georgia a second loss. Now, outside of that, I would say Vandy and Oklahoma as winners were surprising in the SEC, doing as well as they did at 10-2 records, and South Carolina and Florida, as bad as they were this season, losing so many games was a little bit surprising to me. Otherwise, the SEC kind of stacks up where you would expect each team to be at the end of the season. So moving on to less important, but still conference that is considered part of the Power Four, and that's the ACC. Now, this one is wild because you have a 10-2 Virginia team taking on a 7-5 Duke team for the ACC championship game. And this is interesting because the committee has Miami ranked higher than both of these teams, as they should. And this game is interesting because if Virginia wins and wins the conference championship by beating Duke, that is not a strong enough win to say they belong in the playoffs as a 2-loss team. And the committee does not have to take the conference champion. They take the highest ranked teams. So if Miami is the highest ranked ACC team and ranked high enough, they would be most likely to get into the playoffs and represent the ACC. Should the committee even put them in? I don't even know if the committee is going to give an ACC team a shot at the playoffs this year. So I think I made it clear earlier about how I feel about that and Miami being over Notre Dame. So let's see what happens with the ACC and the committee. A little bit better is the Big 12. So the Big 12 has 2 one-loss teams, Texas Tech and BYU, and they're going to play in the conference championship game. And frankly, in my opinion, no matter who wins or loses, both of these teams belong in the playoffs. Period. Outside of those 2 teams, I don't see any other team making it into the playoffs from the Big 12 because there are going to be 2 lost teams that will miss out on the playoffs, and Utah will most likely be one of those teams. The Big 12 was a good enough conference that 2 one-loss teams belong in the playoffs. Really nothing else to say about that. All right, let's go ahead and look at the AP top 25 for week 15. Obviously, Ohio State and Indiana are 1 and 2, the only 2 undefeated teams left standing in the season. Oregon jumps up to number 4 after beating Washington at home. Georgia, number 3. I don't really think they belong there in my opinion, but that's where the AP put them. Texas Tech 5. I don't really have an issue with 6, 7, 8, 9, or well, I do have an issue. I do think Miami should be ranked over Notre Dame. They just should. They beat them head to head. They have the same record. Miami should be ranked over Notre Dame, in my opinion. I know everyone goes crazy with, Notre Dame lost their first 2 games of the season. They've won 10 in a row. Miami's losses were throughout the season. Yeah, I get your argument, and I wouldn't even really argue with you about it, but I certainly don't think Notre Dame belongs at 9 while Miami sits at 12. Because like I said before, if you're going to use Miami's name as a quality loss for Notre Dame, then a quality loss should be by someone who is ranked above you for your argument, someone who is ranked higher than you. So someone who's ranked behind you is not really a quality loss. I don't think. That's not how I see it. Notre Dame can use Texas A&M as a quality loss because Texas A&M is 7 and Notre Dame's 9. So that makes sense. They lost to a team that's ranked higher than they are. So that makes sense. Miami lost, like I said, to 2 8-4 teams in close games. Nobody blew them out. Nobody beat them very badly, unlike Texas, who got absolutely destroyed by Georgia. So Miami has done nothing to say Notre Dame should be ranked ahead of us because they beat them head to head. And they both have 2 losses. Call me old school, but that's how I see it. Also, I think BYU deserve to be ranked ahead of Alabama. They're a one-loss team. One-loss team in the Big 12. I get it. The Big 12 ain't the mighty SEC. But again, the SEC is overrated. The SEC is mid, in my opinion. Everyone in the SEC is going to see how mid they are in the playoffs. They just will. They won't admit it. Even with the losses, they won't admit it. But the SEC is mid. So if you take a look at this graphic at who should be in and who should be out that I found by Fox, BYU, Texas, Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, Miami, or other. So for me, Miami and BYU have earned their way into the playoffs. The Big 12 is good enough to be a playoff contender with 1 loss, as I stated. Miami beat Notre Dame head to head, and their losses are by 3 points and 6 points in overtime. So I personally would knock out Alabama. Like, I know they are a huge brand and a huge name, but that shouldn't get them in the playoffs based off of the name. The SEC will have 4 teams in the playoffs without Bama. That's plenty. That's enough. I mean, have you watched Bama play lately? They struggle to beat average teams, and they do not dominate anyone late in the season. Let's go ahead and look at how I would rank the top 12. And these are my playoff teams. This is what I would have in the playoffs going into conference championship game week. And there's small wiggle room for wins and losses after the conference championship games. But no matter how the conference championship games turn out, these to me are the teams that should be in the playoffs, period. End of story. Coming in at the 1 seed, of course, I have Ohio State. Coming in at the 2 seed, I have Indiana. Now, I have no problem with Indiana dropping a little bit if they lose to Ohio State, especially depending on how much they lose by. If it's a big disparity in margin, whatever. But you can't put Oregon above them because Indiana beat Oregon head to head. So maybe if Texas Tech goes and dominates BYU, you can put Texas Tech at the 2 spot and drop Indiana and Oregon down a little bit. But either way, those teams belong in that position. So I have Oregon at 2, Indiana at 2. I have Oregon at 3. I have Texas Tech at 4. Coming in at number 5, I have Georgia. Currently, 1-loss team, and then a slew of 1-loss SEC teams here. So 5, I have Georgia. 6, I have Ole Miss. 7, I have Oklahoma. 8, I have Texas A&M. All right, now this is where the decision comes into play, and this is how I would do it. At number 9, I have Miami. Why? Because they beat Notre Dame in the head-to-head. They have the same number of losses. I give Miami the number 9 spot. At number 10, I put BYU. At number 11, barely squeaking in and sliding in, I put Notre Dame in there. And then at number 12, it's the guaranteed group of 5 spot. Assuming James Madison wins this week, you put James Madison in there because they have to be in there. That's how I see how the playoffs should be. This is not a prediction of what the committee is going to do. Get that straight. I am not saying this is my prediction of the playoffs. I am saying if I was running college football, this is what the playoffs would look like. And Alabama would be out. All right, here is my football power index. If you take a look at this graphic, I highlighted in red anywhere opponents had a losing record, and in green you will see only 2 teams have not played overall losing records in any part of their schedule, and that's Ohio State and Oklahoma. If you look, Ohio State's overall opponents have been 76 and 68. Their non-conference opponents were 24 and 12. Again, because they haven't lost, undefeated. Their record of their wins of all their common opponents are 76 and 68. That's a winning record. No one else can say that except Oklahoma, because their overall common opponents were 90 and 55, which is an incredibly tough schedule overall. Their non-conference opponents were 28 and 21. The records of the teams that they beat were 70 and 51, and the record of their losses, meaning the teams that they lost to, were 20 and 4 combined records. Everyone else in this graph has lost or has losing records of their opponents. So the records of opponents Alabama has lost to is worse than the team up north or Vanderbilt and USC, who are not going to make the playoffs. So this is another supporting argument why Alabama shouldn't make the playoffs. Ohio State has the best wins against teams with the most number of wins, meaning Ohio State has beaten teams with 76 wins total. That's followed by Indiana, then Oklahoma, then Georgia. But Georgia, their non-conference opponent schedule was 23 and 26, which just goes back to my argument of what type of teams the SEC plays out of conference. If you look at the SEC's non-conference opponents all across the board, Oklahoma's the only one that doesn't play losing records in non-conference schedule. So again, that just supports my SEC non-conference schedule argument that it's weak, which therefore in turn, there's no proof that the SEC is a good conference in general. No proof.
Hey, quick time out here. Please take a moment to just subscribe, comment, and like. If you do all 3 of those things, you'll really help me out in getting the word out for this show. Help me hopefully gain a larger audience. I would greatly appreciate it. So comment, like, and subscribe, please. And go Bucks.
Now it's time for the conference championship games next week and my predictions. As I stated, I went 4-2 last week and I was 50 and 22. So overall, that makes me 54 and 24 on the regular season. So that's a plus 30 in wins picking out of 78. I got 54 right and 24 wrong. So I'm very proud of that. I think I did a pretty good job overall on the season on picking winners and losers. I hope you all feel the same way. So up first, we have the game of the week, the biggest game of the weekend, and that will be the Big Ten Championship, Ohio State against Indiana. Ohio State's favored by 5.5 points. Offensively, Ohio State's averaging 37 points a game. Indiana's averaging 44 points a game. Defensively, Ohio State's giving up just under 8 points a game, and Indiana's giving up about 11 points per game. Now, the difference in these two teams is Ohio State has not struggled in any game to win any game. They have dominated every opponent that they've played. Indiana struggled to beat Oregon, granted a very good team, but they struggled to do it. They struggled to beat Penn State. You all saw it. They had to have that huge play to win the game. They struggled to beat Iowa. They had to have a big play at the end of the game to beat Iowa. So Indiana has not been as dominant on the season, but they did manage to win all their games and stay undefeated. So therefore, I'm obviously taking Ohio State with that defense to win this game and cover the 5.5, even though I don't care about that. They definitely will cover, in my opinion. So, all right, on to the next game. Georgia has to play Alabama. Georgia backdoored their way into the SEC championship game. They are favored by 1.5. The numbers couldn't be any more even. Georgia averages 32 points a game. Alabama 33 points a game. Defensively, they both give up 17 points a game. Alabama did beat Georgia at Georgia in the regular season. Currently, I think Georgia is playing slightly better than Alabama, but Alabama needs this win. I'm picking Alabama to win this game. Not that I'm confident about it, because I think they're both equally mid teams and either team can win, but I'm just going to pick Alabama because they won the last time. Next up, we have BYU at Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game. Texas Tech is favored by 13.5. I'm not even going to get into the numbers here. I believe Texas Tech will win this game fairly handily again, like they did last time they met, and Texas Tech will be the Big 12 champions. And then finally, the Mr. Irrelevant conference game, the ACC championship game. Virginia at 10-2 is a 2.5 point favorite against 7-5 Duke, who gives up 29 points per game. Duke does, which is crazy to me. They're in a conference championship game and they give up 29 points per game. But anyway, I mean, obviously the clear pick here is Virginia. Ohio State over Indiana, Alabama over Georgia, Texas Tech over BYU, and Virginia over Duke. Those are my picks for the championship games this weekend. So if I'm right, Alabama is the SEC champion, but based off of wins and losses, they should be left out of the playoffs, and 4 other SEC teams should be in. And I know that sounds crazy when you look at it that way, that the SEC champion would not be in, but you have to look at the whole picture. So let me know what you think about the playoffs, who you think should be in and should be out, and why. Paint the whole picture. Don't just give me a stat line like, oh, they beat this many ranked teams. Yeah, but how many losses do they have? And what is the record of the opponents that they lost to? And what time of year and when did they lose their games? Like, you can't throw the Florida loss in Texas's face and then ignore the Florida State loss for Alabama. Like, you can't pluck out convenient information and leave out the rest. So I am confident that my 12 teams, based off of the current format, are the best 12 teams. Now, I personally wouldn't give the group of 5 a definite spot, and I would do just the top 12 teams, period. If they were up to me, then Alabama would be in. But based off the fact that you have to let a team like James Madison into the tournament, to me, that knocks Alabama out. Not the way I would do it, but until it changes, this is what the playoffs should look like. Try to convince me otherwise. Also, the SEC is an overrated conference in general, and those teams beating each other does nothing for me to support your argument of a strong win. They do not have the strength of schedule outside of the conference to support this argument. So if we go to the old eye test, you cannot argue the points, because barely getting by bad teams, which every team in the SEC has done, then you have no argument about strength of schedule. By the way, I've said this before and I will say it again. Georgia's record is a mirage. How you say? Lest you forget, if Heupel knows how to line up his kicker for a field goal, Georgia loses to Tennessee. If a bad referee doesn't make a terrible fumble call in the end zone and get fired for it after the game against Auburn, Georgia loses to Auburn. Then we're talking about a 9-3 Georgia team, not in the SEC championship game and not in the playoffs. So they will get in, but make no mistake about it, they won't do well. Again, I thank you all for watching and subscribing. Please pass the show on to other Buckeye fans who you think will enjoy this. And if you are watching and haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and help me make this a full-time living. I would love to be able to bring you live episodes and multiple episodes in a week someday. But until I get that kind of support of subscribers, I just have to do this on the side and work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, just like the rest of you. Also, you can listen to me anywhere weekly that you find podcasts. If you can't get to YouTube and watch the show, I am on every other format, but I do think YouTube is the best way to enjoy the show. So until next time, bleed scarlet and gray, go Bucks.